Hello and welcome to our next edition of our Sparta videos. Lovely to be with you in your homes, offices, libraries or internet cafes for the first, second or third time today, depending on how many of the previous videos you've watched. Before we do get stuck into the business of mentoring and accounting, let's first have a check of the weather conditions here in the MCI Mentor Room. Let's have a look at the weather wall brought to you by MCI Institute. As you can see...
Sorry Shane, so you're a weatherman?
Well, if this goes well.
Alright.
Now, having a look at our weather wall here, you can see temperature is 25 degrees. Very lovely indeed, very pleasant. Our wind speed we've got is 0, and that's largely due to the air conditioning being turned off by building management over the weekend. That in turn has resulted in an increase of humidity, which is now sits at 73%, and that has increased the mental comfort level ever so slightly to a slightly above average 61. But all in all, absolutely marvellous conditions for mentoring today.
And that is M-A-R-V-E-L-L-O-U-S, right?
Right you are, Godley.
Okay.
Now, I believe that you've got something for us on the chart of accounts, is that right?
Yes. So today what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to analyze a transaction. And before we look at a transaction, I want to talk to you a little bit about the chart of accounts. Chart of accounts consists of the different accounts and their account numbers. Now do remember that organizations do not have the same chart of accounts. Now this is very unique for you as an accountant within VAMCO. This is the chart of accounts that you're going to use. Now let's look at the transaction.
Yes, I believe the transaction is going to be on page 18.
Okay. So on page 18, we have a transaction towards the beginning of the page that says $440 was paid for advertising in the local newspaper. That includes $40 GST in it. Now, what we do is we are going to analyze the transaction. We are going to break it into accounts. The accounts involved are, Shane, can you please bring up the chart of accounts for us?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. So in your chart of accounts, you would be able to see that the accounts we're going to use for this transaction are advertising, which is account number 605. It comes under your marketing expenses. The next one is GST paid, which is account number 235. Yeah, which comes under liabilities, under current liabilities, and you have cash at bank, which is 100, and that comes under current assets. So now, once we have analyzed the transaction, we know what accounts are affected. Now it is time for us to put it under debit and credit, right?
Correct. Yes. So now that you know which accounts are going to be affected by this transaction, we now need to put in this to the General Journal. Now, remember that the General Journal is going to give you a story. It's basically a story of the business. It's going to list every transaction that takes place within the business. So that's why it's very important to get this accurate, as that way then it tells an accurate story of the business. The other thing with this as well is that all the different financial documents you use really do start at the General Journal. So that's why this is very important. Now, as you can see, going back to what we covered last time in the previous video with the double entry accounting, you can see here that because we paid $440 for this advertising, the debit side equals 440 and the credit side equals 440. But they're made up slightly differently. The debit side has advertising and GST paid. That's because the advertising itself was only worth $400, but the GST on top of that was $40. Because we paid the transaction with cash, that means then that $440 cash has to come out of our bank account to cover that expense.
Please remember that we always start with the debit.
That's a very important thing. Yes, always when your general journal entry, start with a debit. That is the accepted practice in accounting. Now, the other thing you'll notice there is that the last line is basically a sentence that tells you what happened. That is called the narration. And that's very important because when you're going to be completing these tasks in your assessments, a lot of the time all you'll get is the narration. And that is just going to tell you why we are making this transaction. And that can also guide you as to how to actually enter the general journal entry. So because you can see here, it says advertising paid for local newspaper, we know that there's cash at bank and we know that there's advertising for a fact. And the information that tells us the transaction back on page 18 tells us that there's GST paid involved as well.
Yeah, so make sure that you go through your chart of accounts and go through the transactions in your support document. This will help you answer your assessment questions easily. Thank you for being with us. Bye.
Bye.